The courtroom was dead silent. Everyone's eyes were locked on the little boy standing in the witness box. He was only 8 years old, his small hands gripping the wooden railing as he looked at the judge with teary eyes. "Tell the court the truth," Judge Sterling said, his voice firm and cold. "Did your mother hurt Mr. Thompson?" The boy, Jason, turned his head slowly toward his mother, sitting in the defendant's chair. Her wrists were bound in handcuffs, her face pale and tired. She had been crying, but she shook her head slightly, telling him without words, "Don't be afraid." Jason swallowed hard. He knew the truth. His mother was innocent, but the judge wasn't asking for the truth. He was forcing him into a corner, trapping him. I, Jason stammered, his chest rising and falling as panic gripped him. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Remember, Jason, you promised to tell the truth." Jason clenched his fists. He had no choice. He had to say something. And then, in that moment, his mind sparked with an idea, a trick that would turn the whole courtroom upside down. He took a deep breath and said, "Yes, my mother did it." A collective gasp filled the courtroom. His mother's face turned ghostly white. The judge smiled, pleased. The prosecutor looked satisfied. But Jason wasn't finished. He turned to the judge and said, "And I can prove it." The whole courtroom leaned forward. Jason had their full attention now. What they didn't know was that Jason had just set his own trap. A trap for the judge. 2 weeks earlier, life was simple. Jason lived with his mother, Emily Carter, in a small apartment on the east side of town. His mother worked 2 jobs, one at a bakery in the morning and another at a diner at night. They didn't have much, but they had each other. Then everything changed. One evening, when Jason and his mother returned home from the grocery store, they found their apartment door wide open. The lights were on, and the place was a mess. Drawers were yanked out, their belongings scattered all over the floor. Jason clung to his mother's coat. "Mom, what happened?" Emily's face was pale. She stepped forward cautiously, gripping her car keys tightly like a weapon. She checked each room. No one was inside. But something was wrong. Something was missing. Then Jason saw it. The living room window was open, and on the windowsill was a muddy footprint. Someone had broken in. Emily called the police. An officer arrived, took some notes, and promised to investigate. But Jason could tell from the officer's bored expression that nothing would be done. The next day, something even stranger happened. Emily got a call from her boss at the diner. "Emily, don't bother coming in today. You're fired." "What?" Emily gasped. "But why?" The manager hesitated before speaking. "I don't know what's going on, but a man came in today, said you stole from him. He showed us proof. We can't have a thief working here." Emily's face went pale. Jason could hear every word. "Mom, you didn't steal anything." "Of course I didn't," she whispered. "Someone's trying to frame me." Then, that night, the police came knocking. Emily opened the door and found 2 officers standing there. One of them, a tall man with a thick mustache, held up a piece of paper. "Emily Carter, you're under arrest for assaulting Mr. Thompson and robbing him of $5,000. Emily's eyes widened. "What? I don't even know a Mr. Thompson." But they didn't listen. They grabbed her arms and dragged her toward their squad car. Jason screamed, running after them, pounding on the officer's back. "Let her go. She didn't do anything." Emily twisted her head to look at him. "It's okay, baby. I love you. Don't be afraid." But Jason was afraid. He had never been more afraid in his life. That night, he was sent to stay with a foster family while his mother sat in jail. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He kept thinking, who is doing this to my mom? Then he remembered something. The day before their apartment was broken into, his mom had told him about a man who had come to the diner. He had been staring at her, acting strange. Jason didn't know much, but he knew one thing. Someone wanted his mom gone, and he had to find out who. The next morning, Jason snuck out of the foster home and ran all the way to the diner. He pressed his face against the window, scanning the customers inside. Was the man here? Then he saw a familiar face. A man in a suit, sitting in the corner, talking on the phone. Jason's heart pounded. He recognized that man from somewhere. Then it hit him. That was the same man who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom yesterday, watching his mother's trial. Jason's stomach twisted. Who was he? And why was he watching everything? Jason needed to find out. But before he could act, a hand grabbed his shoulder. He turned, startled, and found himself face to face with a police officer. "Jason Carter?" the officer asked. Jason nodded slowly, his heart racing. "The judge wants to see you." Jason's blood ran cold. Now, standing in the courtroom, all eyes on him, Jason took a deep breath. He had walked right into the judge's trap, but they didn't know that he had a trap of his own. "I can prove my mom did it," he repeated, looking directly at the judge. Judge Sterling leaned forward. "Go on." Jason turned to the prosecutor. "Do you have the security footage from Mr. Thompson's building?" The prosecutor looked surprised but nodded. "Yes, we do." "Then show it." The prosecutor hesitated. "That's not necessary." "Show it," Jason repeated, his voice steady. The judge's face twitched. "Very well. Play the footage." A moment later, the screen flickered on. Everyone in the courtroom turned their eyes toward the screen as the black and white footage played. A shadowy figure appeared, moving through the hallway of Mr. Thompson's building. The person turned toward the camera for a split second. And that's when the entire courtroom gasped. The figure in the footage wasn't Jason's mother. It was someone else. Someone very familiar. Jason turned toward the judge, his heart pounding. The person in the footage was Judge Sterling himself. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Jason's trap had just sprung. The courtroom exploded with noise. People gasped, whispered, and pointed at the screen. Even the bailiff looked stunned. The prosecutor's face turned pale as if he had seen a ghost. But Jason didn't take his eyes off Judge Sterling. The judge's face was frozen in shock, but only for a moment. Then, just as quickly, his expression hardened. He slammed his gavel so hard that the entire courtroom flinched. "Order!" His voice roared through the chamber. "I will have order in my court." The murmurs died down, but the tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. Did I just make a huge mistake? Judge Sterling turned his cold, sharp eyes to Jason. His jaw was clenched, his nostrils flared. "That footage is irrelevant." Jason narrowed his eyes. "How is it irrelevant? That's not my mom in the footage." That's enough, young man," the judge barked. His voice was shaking, just a little, but Jason caught it. The prosecutor shuffled his papers nervously. "Your Honor, I wasn't aware we had this particular angle of the footage." The judge slammed his gavel again. "It does not matter. The defendant is still on trial, and this child is only here to answer the questions asked of him." Jason felt his stomach twist. He had trapped the judge, but the judge was powerful. He wasn't going to let himself go down easily. That's when Jason realized something terrifying. He's going to make sure my mom is found guilty, no matter what. Jason clenched his fists. He had to act fast. "You said I should tell the truth, right?" Jason asked, looking directly at the judge. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Yes." "Then the truth is that my mother didn't do this," Jason said. His voice was louder now, more confident. "You did." The room went dead silent again. Judge Sterling's face darkened. "You dare accuse me? A sitting judge? You're just a child." "But I have proof," Jason shot back. Sterling's fingers curled over the edge of his bench. He was sweating now. He knew. He knew Jason was right. Jason turned to the prosecutor. "If my mom really stole $5,000, then where's the money?" The prosecutor looked flustered. "We? You don't have it, do you?" Jason pressed. "Because my mom never took it. But somebody did." Jason spun around, pointing straight at the judge. "And now we just saw who was really in Mr. Thompson's building that night." Judge Sterling's lip twitched. He slammed his gavel so hard that it cracked against the wood. "This court is in recess," he roared. "Bailiff, remove this boy from the stand." Two bailiffs immediately moved toward Jason, grabbing him by the arms. "Wait, no, you have to listen." Jason struggled, kicking his legs. His mother shot up from her seat. "Jason," but the guards held her down. "Stay in your seat, Miss Carter." Jason was dragged toward the exit, his heart hammering. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had thought if he exposed the truth, everyone would listen. But he had underestimated something. The judge controlled this courtroom, and now he was going to make sure Jason never spoke again. 2 days earlier, Jason sat alone in his foster home. He had barely eaten, barely slept. Every night, he kept playing his mother's arrest over and over again in his head. That's when he made his decision. If no one was going to help his mother, he would. He started by sneaking into the courthouse. It was easier than he thought. People barely noticed a small kid walking around. He overheard the clerks talking, picked up little details, but what he really needed was proof. Then, he got lucky. One of the clerks mentioned something about the security footage from Mr. Thompson's building. Jason knew the footage would prove his mother's innocence, if he could just get to it. Late that night, he found a way into the records office. His hands were shaking as he scrolled through the files. Then, suddenly, he saw it. The footage. He clicked the file open and his eyes widened. That wasn't his mother. That was Judge Sterling. Jason's breath caught in his throat. His hands turned ice cold. The judge had been in Mr. Thompson's building. But why? Jason didn't have time to think about it. He quickly saved the footage onto a USB drive and slipped it into his pocket. Now, all he had to do was find a way to show it in court. Back in the present, Jason was dragged down the courthouse hallway by 2 guards. "Where are you taking me?" he demanded. The taller guard didn't answer. The shorter one glanced at him with pity. "Just be quiet, kid." Jason struggled, but they were too strong. They led him into a small room and locked the door behind him. Jason turned and pounded on the door. "Let me out. I have proof. You can't just lock me in here." But there was no answer. Jason's heart pounded. He knew what was happening. The judge was covering his tracks. And now, Jason was in real danger. He turned and scanned the room. It was small, with a single window high up on the wall. A desk and chair sat in the corner. There was no way out. Jason sat down, breathing hard. He needed to think. Fast. He reached into his pocket. The USB drive was still there. This is my only proof. But how could he get it out? Then, an idea sparked in his mind. Jason took a deep breath and pulled the chair toward the window. He climbed up and peered outside. Below, he saw reporters gathered outside the courthouse, waiting for news on the trial. His heart pounded. This is my chance. Jason took off his shoe, wrapped the USB drive in his sock, and tied it tightly. Then, with all his strength, he flung it out the window. The small bundle tumbled through the air and landed near a group of reporters. Jason clenched his fists. Please, someone find it. At that moment, the door to the room swung open. Judge Sterling stood there, his face twisted with rage. Jason's blood ran cold. "You're causing a lot of trouble, boy," the judge said. His voice was low, dangerous. Jason backed away. "You can't hide the truth forever." The judge smiled darkly. "I don't have to hide it. I just have to make sure you don't talk." Jason's stomach twisted. Then, behind the judge, a voice called out, "Your Honor, there's a problem outside." The judge stiffened. His eyes darted toward the hallway. Jason held his breath. Had someone found the USB drive? The judge turned back to Jason, his face unreadable. Then, with a final glare, he stepped out of the room and slammed the door behind him. Jason let out a shaky breath. He had just bought himself some time, but time was running out. Jason pressed his ear against the door, straining to hear what was happening outside. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest. "Sir, there's a commotion outside," a voice said. "What kind of commotion?" Judge Sterling's voice snapped back. Jason held his breath. A group of reporters found something, a small bundle. It had a USB drive in it. Jason's stomach did a flip. They found it. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the judge's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Get that USB drive. Now." Jason backed away from the door, his mind racing. He had sent his only proof out there, but would it be enough? The judge had power. He could make things disappear, including evidence. Jason couldn't sit and wait. He had to get out of this room. He scanned the space again. The window was too high to climb out of. The door was locked. There were no vents big enough for him to crawl through. Then, his eyes landed on the chair again. An idea sparked in his head. Jason grabbed the chair, lifted it with all his strength, and smashed it against the door handle. The metal frame cracked. He did it again and again. Bang, bang, crack. The lock gave way. Jason pushed the door open just a sliver and peeked outside. The hallway was empty. The judge must have taken the guards with him. This was his chance. Jason slipped out of the room and ran. Outside the courthouse, the reporters were in a frenzy. A tall woman with curly hair held up the USB drive in her hand. "This was found outside the courthouse just minutes ago," she said into her microphone. "We don't know what's on it yet, but sources say it might be connected to the case of Emily Carter." A second reporter spoke. "The court has refused to release security footage of the crime, but if this drive contains what we think it does, we may finally see the truth." Jason pushed through the courthouse doors just as Judge Sterling stormed outside, flanked by 2 guards. His face was red with anger. "That drive is court property," he barked. "Hand it over at once." The female reporter raised an eyebrow. "Court property? Then why hasn't it been used in the trial?" The judge hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Jason to step forward. "That drive shows who was really in Mr. Thompson's building," Jason shouted. His voice was loud, clear. The cameras turned toward him. "And it wasn't my mom." The crowd gasped. Reporters shoved microphones toward him. "Jason Carter, can you confirm what's on this USB drive? Are you saying the judge is hiding evidence? Does this mean your mother is innocent?" Judge Sterling clenched his fists. His eyes darted toward the security guards. "Take that boy back inside." The guards moved toward Jason. But then, the female reporter held up her phone. "Wait just a second," she said. "I just sent the footage to my entire news network." The judge froze. The reporter smiled. "That means, right now, the entire city is about to see exactly what's on that drive." Jason's chest swelled with hope. He had done it. He had exposed the truth. Judge Sterling's face twisted with fury. The moment stretched on in silence. The crowd stared at him, waiting. The cameras were still rolling. Then, the judge did something Jason never expected. He laughed. A slow, dark chuckle that sent a chill down Jason's spine. "You think this means anything?" the judge sneered. "You think showing a video changes who has the power?" Jason's stomach dropped. The judge turned to the guards. "Take the boy and the reporters into custody. Charge them with obstruction of justice." Jason's heart stopped. The guards stepped forward, reaching for him. The reporters gasped as they were grabbed by the arms. Jason struggled. "You can't do this. This isn't justice." Judge Sterling smiled cruelly. "I am justice." The guards dragged Jason back toward the courthouse steps. Then, suddenly, boom, a loud explosion of sound erupted from the street. Tires screeched. People shouted. Jason twisted his head and saw. A black SUV had slammed to a stop in front of the courthouse. The doors flew open, and out stepped Mr. Thompson, the man Jason's mother had supposedly robbed. But he wasn't alone. 2 police officers, higher ranking than the guards inside, flanked him, and behind them was a stern-looking woman in a suit. "Judge Sterling," the woman called out, holding up a badge. "Federal authorities. Step away from the boy immediately." The judge's face drained of color. "What is the meaning of this?" The woman strode forward. "You are under investigation for corruption, fraud, and evidence tampering." The crowd gasped. Reporters shoved microphones forward. Jason felt his breath catch. It was happening. The truth was finally coming out. Judge Sterling shook his head. "This is ridiculous. I am a judge. You have no proof of these absurd accusations." Mr. Thompson stepped forward. His face was bruised, and his arm was in a sling, but his voice was strong. "Actually, there's plenty of proof," he said coldly, "including the real security footage that you tried to bury." The judge's eyes went wide. "What?" Mr. Thompson nodded toward Jason. "This kid isn't lying. I was attacked that night, but it wasn't by Emily Carter. It was by you." The entire courthouse erupted in shock. Jason turned to the judge, watching the color drain from his face. This was it. This was the moment he lost. "Judge Sterling," the federal officer said, "you are under arrest." The judge's eyes darted around wildly. "You can't. This is a mistake. This is—" The officers grabbed his arms and snapped handcuffs around his wrists. Jason took a deep, shuddering breath. It was over. His mother was safe. He had one. But just as Jason started to feel relief, something unexpected happened. Judge Sterling stopped struggling. He turned his head slightly, just enough to lock eyes with Jason, and then he smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. Jason's breath hitched. The judge leaned in slightly and whispered under his breath, "This isn't over, kid." Jason's stomach twisted. Before he could say anything, the officers shoved the judge into the back of a police car. Jason watched as the car drove away, disappearing into the city. He should have felt happy, but instead, a cold chill ran down his spine. Because something told him, Judge Sterling wasn't lying. Jason stood frozen on the courthouse steps, watching the police car disappear down the street. His hands trembled. He should have felt victorious. His mother was going to be freed, and Judge Sterling was finally behind bars. But that smile, that whisper, "This isn't over, kid." Those words echoed in his head, making his stomach twist. A hand gently touched his shoulder. "Jason." His mother's voice broke through his thoughts. He turned and saw her running toward him, free from her handcuffs, tears streaming down her face. She threw her arms around him, holding him so tightly he could barely breathe. "You did it, baby," she whispered, sobbing into his hair. "You saved me." Jason clung to her. "I told you I would." The crowd around them erupted in cheers. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and the police officers who had arrested the judge looked on, nodding in approval. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his expression full of guilt. "Emily, I am so sorry. I was tricked just like everyone else. If I had known." Jason's mom wiped her eyes and managed a small smile. "It's not your fault. Judge Sterling had power over all of us." Jason turned to the woman in the suit, the federal officer who had arrested the judge. "Is he really going to prison?" he asked. The woman nodded. "He's being taken in for questioning. With all the evidence we have, he'll never be a judge again." Jason exhaled. It was finally over. Or so he thought. That night, Jason and his mother returned to their apartment. It was still a mess from the break-in, but at least it was home. They spent the next hour cleaning up. Jason picked up his comic books from the floor, and his mom straightened the couch cushions. Every now and then, she would look at him, her eyes full of gratitude. "You're amazing, Jason," she said softly. He grinned. "I am pretty smart." She chuckled and ruffled his hair. "Yes, you are." For the first time in weeks, Jason felt safe. Until, knock, knock, knock. A heavy knock echoed from the front door. Jason and his mom froze. Her eyes met his. "Did you invite anyone over?" Jason shook his head slowly. The knock came again, harder this time. Jason's mom hesitated, then stepped toward the door. "Who is it?" Silence. Then, "We need to talk." Jason's blood turned to ice. It was Judge Sterling's voice. His mother's face drained of color. "That's impossible," she whispered. Jason's heart pounded. Hadn't they just seen him get arrested? Hadn't they just watched the police take him away? But there was no mistaking it. The voice behind the door was deep, slow, and eerily calm. Judge Sterling was here. Jason grabbed his mother's wrist. "Mom, don't open it." She hesitated, then backed away. More silence. Then, "You should have kept quiet, boy." Jason felt his throat close up. And then, just like that, footsteps. Fading. Whoever it was, they were gone. Jason's mother rushed to the peephole and gasped. "No one's there," she whispered. Jason ran to the window and peeked outside. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. Nothing. No car. No footsteps. No one running. It was as if Judge Sterling had never been there. Jason's stomach twisted. "This isn't over, kid." The next morning, Jason sat at the kitchen table, staring at his cereal. He had barely slept. Every creak of the apartment, every distant car horn, had made his skin crawl. Had it really been Judge Sterling at their door? Or was it just someone trying to scare them? The news was already covering the story of the judge's arrest. Reporters talked about the corruption scandal, the hidden evidence, and how many cases Sterling had wrongfully decided. "Emily Carter has been cleared of all charges," the reporter on the TV said. However, questions remain about Judge Sterling's sudden rise to power and how many others may have been involved in his corruption. Jason's mom turned off the TV. "It's over now," she said, but Jason could hear the doubt in her voice. Then, her phone buzzed. She picked it up and frowned. "A private number?" She answered hesitantly. "Hello?" Jason watched as her face slowly lost all color. "Who is this?" she whispered. A long pause. Then, she dropped the phone. Jason rushed to pick it up. The line was dead. But before the call had cut off, he had heard just two chilling words. "I'm waiting." Jason's blood ran cold. It wasn't over. Not even close. Jason's mother stood frozen, staring at the phone on the floor as if it had bitten her. Jason felt his breath quicken. "I'm waiting." Judge Sterling was supposed to be behind bars. He was supposed to be gone. But somehow, he wasn't. Jason bent down and picked up the phone. The call had already ended. No trace of who it was. No message. Nothing. His mom finally snapped out of her trance and grabbed the phone from his hands. She immediately started dialing. "Who are you calling?" Jason asked. "The police," she said, her voice shaky. Jason sat tensely as she spoke to an officer, explaining the call, the voice, everything. He could hear the officer's response. "We understand your concern, ma'am, but Judge Sterling is still in custody. There's no way he could have contacted you." Jason's mother frowned.
But it was him.
"Do you have proof of that?" the officer asked. Jason clenched his fists. "Proof? They always needed proof." "No," his mom admitted. "But you have to. Miss Carter, I assure you, Sterling is locked up. If there's anything else suspicious, don't hesitate to call back." Then, they hung up. Jason's mom let out a frustrated breath. "They don't believe me." Jason swallowed hard. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was just someone messing with us. His mom didn't answer. She sat down, rubbing her temples. Jason wanted to believe the police. He really did. But deep down, he knew the truth. Sterling wasn't finished. And somehow, he was still watching them. That night, Jason couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Judge Sterling had been so sure of himself in that courtroom. He hadn't looked like a man who had lost. He had looked like a man waiting for something. Jason turned over, staring at the window. The curtains were drawn, but he could hear the faint sound of cars outside. Then, a small sound. A click. Jason sat up straight. It came from the front door. He held his breath. Another click, like someone was trying to unlock the door. Jason's heart slammed against his ribs. He slid out of bed as quietly as he could and crept toward his mother's room. She was already awake, sitting up in bed, listening. "You heard it too?" Jason whispered. She nodded, holding a baseball bat in her hands. The clicking sound stopped. Silence. Jason's mom tightened her grip on the bat and tiptoed toward the door. Jason followed, his pulse hammering. She peered through the peephole. A sharp breath. Then, she yanked Jason back, pulling him behind her. "Mom?" he whispered. Her face was pale. Jason slowly, carefully, leaned forward and looked through the peephole himself. His stomach dropped. There, standing in the hallway, was a man in a dark suit. He wasn't moving. He wasn't knocking. He was just standing there, waiting. Jason's throat tightened. He couldn't see the man's face. It was too shadowed. But he felt his presence. The air around him seemed wrong. Then, just as Jason started to pull back, the man's head snapped up. Jason flinched. The man knew he was watching. A slow smile spread across his face. Jason stumbled backward. "Mom, lock the door now." His mom fumbled with the deadbolt, twisting it as fast as she could. Then, knock, knock, knock. The knocks were slow, deliberate. Not urgent, not frantic. Like whoever was on the other side had all the time in the world. Jason's mom grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. "Yes, I need police. Someone is outside my apartment. I think." She stopped. Jason looked up at her, confused. Then, she turned the phone toward him. The call had disconnected. A message appeared on the screen. "No one is coming." Jason's blood ran cold. His mom's hand covered her mouth. The knocks came again. Slower, louder. Then, the handle jiggled. Jason's mom grabbed his wrist, and pulled him toward the back of the apartment. "Come on," she whispered. Jason's feet barely touched the ground as they ran into the bedroom and locked the door. His mom pressed her back against it, breathing hard. "What do we do?" Jason whispered. She swallowed. "We get out of here." Jason's mind raced. The fire escape. He ran to the window and yanked it open. A cold gust of wind hit him as he looked down. They were on the 3rd floor. The metal ladder was just within reach. His mom hesitated, then climbed out first, gripping the railing tightly. "Come on, Jason." Jason didn't need to be told twice. He swung his legs over the ledge, gripping the bars as he stepped onto the fire escape. His heart pounded. Then, a sound from inside. Jason turned his head. The front door opened. A shadow stepped inside. Jason's mom grabbed his arm. "Don't look. Go." Jason forced his feet to move. They climbed down as fast as they could, metal creaking beneath them. Jason's hands burned from gripping the cold bars too tightly. Then, a voice from above. "Going somewhere?" Jason's heart stopped. He made the mistake of looking up. A face peered over the edge of the fire escape. Judge Sterling. He was here. He was free. Jason's stomach twisted in terror. His mom grabbed his hand. "Run." They hit the ground, their feet slamming against the pavement. Jason turned one last time, just in time to see Judge Sterling stepping onto the fire escape, his face twisted in amusement. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't panicked. He was calm, because he knew something they didn't. Jason and his mother took off running down the dark alley, their breath ragged. They had escaped, for now, but one thing was clear. Judge Sterling was not in prison. He was not gone, and he was hunting them. Jason and his mom sprinted through the dark alley, their breath ragged, their legs burning with exhaustion. The city lights flickered in the distance, but the streets around them were empty. Jason risked a glance over his shoulder. Judge Sterling wasn't running. He was just walking. Slow, steady, like he knew they had nowhere to go. Jason's stomach twisted. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just some corrupt judge covering his tracks. This was something worse. "Mom, where do we go?" Jason gasped. His mom yanked him toward a side street. "I don't know, but we can't go home." They dashed around a corner and into a busier street. Cars rumbled past, headlights flashing. Jason spotted a police station down the road. "There!" he shouted. His mom hesitated, then nodded. "Run." They pushed forward, dodging pedestrians. Jason's heart pounded. If they could just make it inside, they'd be safe. They were only a few feet away when a black car screeched to a stop in front of them. Jason and his mom skidded to a halt. The back door opened. A man stepped out. Not Sterling. Someone worse. He was tall, bald, dressed in an expensive suit. His face was blank, unreadable, but his eyes locked onto Jason, like he had been waiting for him. Jason's mother grabbed his hand and backed away. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man tilted his head. "Get in the car." Jason's stomach dropped. "No way." The man sighed, as if annoyed. Then, he reached into his jacket. Jason's mom shoved him behind her. "No," she snapped. "We are not going anywhere with you." The man paused. Then, slowly, he pulled out a phone. He turned it toward them. A video played on the screen. Jason's breath caught in his throat. It was inside their apartment door, their living room, their kitchen. Someone had recorded it. Someone had been inside their home. Jason's mom's face turned white. The man spoke calmly. "If you don't get in the car, something very bad will happen." Jason felt his whole body shake. They weren't just being hunted. They were being watched. His mom's grip tightened on his hand. "Jason, when I say run, you run. Okay?" Jason nodded quickly, his heart racing. Then, his mom threw her grocery bag straight at the man's face. "Run." Jason bolted. His legs pumped as fast as they could, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear his mom right behind him. The man cursed, stumbling back. Then, another voice. "Don't let them get away." Jason's chest tightened. More footsteps. More people. They weren't alone. Judge Sterling hadn't been working alone. Jason and his mom dashed into a convenience store, shoving past the automatic doors. The cashier looked up in alarm. "Hey, Jason's mom slammed the door behind them. Call the police. The cashier frowned. What's going? Then, the man in the suit stepped into view outside. The cashier's face paled. Jason and his mom crouched behind the shelves. The man didn't come inside. He just stood there, waiting. Jason's breathing was too loud. His heart pounded in his ears. His mom gripped his hand. We stay here until the police come. Jason nodded. But deep down, he knew. Judge Sterling had people everywhere. And this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Outside, the man in the suit pulled out his phone. A message appeared on the screen. Sterling, don't hurt them. Yet. The man smirked and put the phone away. He had all the time in the world. And sooner or later, the boy would belong to them. Jason crouched behind the convenience store shelves, gripping his mother's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded against his ribs. Outside, the man in the suit stood motionless, just watching, waiting. The store's cashier fumbled with his phone. I'm calling the cops, he muttered, his voice shaky. Jason's mom nodded. Tell them we're being followed. Tell them. Knock. Knock. Jason flinched. The man was knocking on the glass doors. Slow. Deliberate. Like he knew the police wouldn't come fast enough. The cashier hesitated, staring at the man. Do you know him? Jason's mom tightened her grip on his hand. No. The man outside slowly lifted a hand and wagged a single finger. No, no, no. Jason's stomach twisted. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. You can run, but it won't matter. The cashier spoke into the phone, his voice hushed. Yeah, I got a woman and kid here. Says they're being followed. No, the guy's outside. Yeah, he's just standing there. Jason looked at his mom. What do we do? She swallowed hard. We wait. Jason wasn't sure that was the right move. What if the police never came? What if? The man in the suit turned and walked away. Jason blinked. He's leaving? The man moved slowly, deliberately, disappearing around the corner. Jason didn't trust it. His mom stayed silent, thinking. Then she turned to the cashier. Did they say how long until an officer gets here? He looked at his phone. They said they're sending someone, but there's a delay. Busy night. Jason clenched his fists. Judge Sterling knew that. This whole thing was planned. Jason turned to his mom. We can't just sit here. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I know. She exhaled sharply, then stood up. We leave through the back. Jason followed as she led him toward the storage room. The cashier frowned. Hey, shouldn't you wait for the cops? Jason's mom turned back, her face firm. Tell them what happened. Tell them we were here. But we can't wait. She opened the back door and peeked outside. The alley behind the store was dimly lit, the street buzzing faintly in the distance. Empty. For now. Come on, she whispered. Jason stepped out, his heart hammering. His mom held his hand tight, moving quickly toward the main road. Every shadow felt like a trap. Every parked car looked like someone was inside, waiting. They reached the street. A cab drove by. His mom waved frantically. Taxi. The car slowed. Jason could have cried from relief. They scrambled inside. His mom locked the doors instantly. Where to? The driver asked. Jason's mom hesitated. She looked at Jason. We need to go somewhere safe. Jason thought hard. Somewhere they wouldn't expect. Somewhere no one would look for them. Then it hit him. My old school, he said. His mom frowned. What? The school is closed for the weekend. No one will expect us to be there. We can hide there until we figure out what to do. She bit her lip, then nodded. To Lincoln Elementary, she told the driver. The car pulled off, melting into traffic. Jason exhaled. They had escaped. For now. 30 minutes later, the cab stopped in front of Lincoln Elementary. The building was dark, the parking lot empty. Are you sure about this? His mom whispered. Jason nodded. Yeah. No one's here. We can get inside through the side entrance. It's never locked properly. His mom paid the driver. Thank you. The man tipped his hat. You folks stay safe. They stepped out, shivering as the cold air wrapped around them. Jason led his mom around the building, toward the side doors near the gym. He reached for the handle, pulled. It opened, just like he remembered. They slipped inside. The hallways were dark and quiet. Jason's mom exhaled. Okay, we'll stay here for a bit, then decide what to do next. Jason nodded. His body was exhausted, but his mind was still racing. They made their way to the library, where the couches were softer. His mom sat down, rubbing her temples. This is insane, she whispered. I don't understand. How is he out? How did he find us so fast? Jason sat beside her. Mom, I don't think this is just about you anymore. She looked at him. What do you mean? Jason hesitated. Then he whispered, I think they want me. His mom's face filled with horror. Before she could say anything, a noise. A soft click. Jason stiffened. The front door. Someone had just come inside. His mom gripped his hand. Jason's throat went dry. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Slow. Steady. Jason's blood ran cold. They weren't alone. Jason and his mom pressed themselves against the library wall, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps echoed through the empty hallways of the school, slow and deliberate. Whoever was inside wasn't in a hurry. Jason's mom tightened her grip on his hand. He could feel her pulse, rapid and unsteady, just like his own. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, a soft, eerie whistling began. Jason's stomach twisted. The tune was slow, haunting. It was a melody Jason didn't recognize, but something about it felt wrong. Whoever was in the school wanted them to hear it. Jason's mom pulled him toward the librarian's desk, crouching low behind it. She brought a finger to her lips. Jason nodded. He understood. We don't move. We don't make a sound. The whistling continued, getting closer. Jason clenched his fists. His mind raced. How did they find them so fast? Was it Sterling? Or someone working for him? The whistling stopped. Jason's heart pounded so hard he thought it might give them away. Then, the door to the library creaked open. A shadow stretched across the floor. Someone was inside. Jason swallowed the scream that threatened to rise in his throat. The figure stepped in slowly, their footsteps muffled by the carpet. Jason saw black dress shoes. A long coat. The person stopped near the center of the room. Then, in a calm voice, they spoke. Come out, Jason. Jason's entire body stiffened. The voice was deep, smooth. Not Judge Sterling's. Someone else. Jason's mom tensed beside him. The man sighed. Hiding won't help you. We will find you. Jason felt a shiver run down his spine. Who was this man? Jason's mom reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She quickly typed something and handed it to Jason. Run when I say. Jason barely nodded. The man in the coat sighed again. Jason, I know you're scared. His voice was almost gentle. But you shouldn't be. We don't want to hurt you. Jason didn't believe that for a second. The man took another slow step forward. Judge Sterling told us all about you. You're very special. Jason's breath hitched. Special? What did that mean? Jason's mom's fingers twitched. She was getting ready to move. The man continued. You were clever in that courtroom. Very clever. But you're playing a game you don't understand. Jason clenched his jaw. The man tilted his head. You exposed Sterling. But you still don't know the truth, do you? Jason froze. His mind screamed at him to ignore the words. But the man's tone, the certainty in his voice, he knew something. Jason's mom took a deep breath. Then she lunged. She grabbed a heavy book from the shelf and hurled it at the man's head. The man ducked with terrifying speed, but it was too late. Run! Jason's mom shouted. Jason shot up and sprinted toward the back exit. The man growled in frustration. Stop them! Jason didn't look back. He heard footsteps pounding behind him. The man was fast. Too fast. Jason's mom grabbed his wrist and pulled him down the hallway. We have to get outside. Jason ran as hard as he could, his lungs burning. Then, another figure stepped into the hallway ahead. Jason's stomach dropped. A second man, dressed in the same dark coat. Jason's mom skidded to a stop. They were trapped. The first man slowed behind them. Jason heard his footsteps, calm and patient. The second man smirked. Nowhere left to go. Jason's mom stepped in front of Jason, shielding him. Who are you? She demanded. The first man adjusted his coat. We work for an organization that takes care of special cases, Jason's chest tightened. What does that mean? The first man smiled. It means you, Jason. Jason felt his blood run cold. The man took a slow step forward. Judge Sterling was part of something much bigger, he continued. Something you got in the way of. Jason swallowed. His head was spinning. The man smirked. And now, we have to decide what to do with you. Jason's mom's hands balled into fists. Over my dead body. The second man sighed. We were hoping you'd say that. He reached into his coat. But then, bang, a gunshot rang out. Jason flinched. The two men spun around in alarm. Freeze. Jason turned, and his heart leapt. 3 police officers stormed down the hallway, guns drawn. The men in the coats reacted fast. The first one pulled something from his pocket. Bang. A second gunshot rang out, hitting the wall near him. The first man snarled, then turned to Jason. We'll be back. Then, without warning, he and the second man took off running. Jason's mom grabbed his hand. Come on. The officers chased after the men, shouting commands. Jason and his mom ran in the opposite direction, bursting through the school's side doors. Cold air hit Jason's face as they stumbled outside. More police cars were arriving. Officers poured out, weapons raised. Jason's chest heaved. His head spun. He turned to his mom. What just happened? She looked just as shaken. They weren't just working for Sterling, she whispered. They were working for something bigger. Jason's stomach twisted. The police hadn't saved them. They had just bought them time. Because Jason knew, deep in his bones, the men in coats would be back. And next time, they wouldn't miss. The flashing red and blue lights painted the school in eerie colors as Jason and his mom sat on the back of an ambulance, wrapped in thin blankets. The night air was cold, but Jason's skin burned with fear. He could still hear the gunshots. The way the men in the coats moved, calm, calculated. They weren't like Judge Sterling. They weren't desperate or sloppy. They were professionals. And they had promised to come back. A police officer, a tall woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, crouched in front of them. Her badge read Detective Rowe. Are you two hurt? She asked. Jason's mom shook her head. No, but we were nearly kidnapped. Detective Rowe nodded grimly. We're tracking the men who ran. Our officers lost them after a few blocks, but we'll find them. Jason didn't believe that for a second. Those men weren't the type to be found. Jason's mom spoke, her voice tight. Judge Sterling, is he still in custody? Detective Rowe frowned. That's the thing. Jason's breath caught. The federal agents who took him in, Rowe continued. They never brought him to the detention center. Jason felt like he had been punched in the gut. His mom's hands clenched into fists. What do you mean? Rowe exhaled. I mean he disappeared before he even got processed. We don't know how. We don't know who helped him. But we know one thing. She looked directly at Jason. Sterling was never working alone. Jason already knew that. The question was, who else was involved? And why did they want him? 2 hours later, Jason and his mom sat in a police station conference room. The coffee in front of them had gone cold. Jason's hands were still shaking. We can't go home, his mom whispered. Jason swallowed hard. Then where do we go? She looked at Detective Rowe, who stood by the door. Can you put us in protective custody? Rowe hesitated. We can put you in a safe house, but I don't know if that'll stop them. Jason tensed. You don't think the police can protect us? Rowe looked troubled. I think whoever these men are, they have connections. Someone helped Sterling escape. Someone erased his tracks. Someone shut down the police response when you called for help. Jason's stomach turned. These people weren't just powerful. They were inside the system. Jason's mom rubbed her forehead. Then what do we do? Rowe exhaled. I might have an idea. Someone who can help. Jason frowned. Who? Rowe checked the hallway, then lowered her voice. He used to be an FBI agent, but he left years ago, said he saw too much. Now, he works off the grid. If anyone can figure out what's really going on, it's him. Jason's mom didn't hesitate. Where do we find him? Rowe gave them a serious look. He doesn't like visitors. And if we go to him, you won't be safe in a police station anymore. Jason felt his pulse quicken. This was it. They were stepping into something bigger than themselves. But there was no other option. His mom looked at him. Jason, are you ready for this? Jason took a deep breath. Then he nodded. Yeah, let's go. An hour later, they were on the road. Detective Rowe drove them far from the city, deep into the countryside. Jason stared out the window as the streetlights disappeared, replaced by trees and empty roads. His mom was tense beside him. Who is this guy? She asked. Rowe kept her eyes on the road. His name is Dawson. He was one of the best agents the FBI ever had. But then something happened. Jason leaned forward. What? Rowe hesitated. I don't know. He never told anyone. But one day, he just quit. Moved out here. Started preparing for something. Like he knew something was coming. Jason's skin prickled. His mom folded her arms. And you trust him? Rowe smirked. I don't trust anyone. But if anyone can help us figure out why Sterling wanted Jason, it's him. Jason felt his chest tighten. He had a bad feeling about this, but they didn't have a choice. They arrived at a secluded cabin deep in the woods. No lights, no signs of life. Just a small wooden house with reinforced windows and thick steel doors. Rowe killed the engine. Stay close. They stepped out into the cold night air. Jason's breath came out in white puffs. Rowe approached the front door and knocked 3 times. Silence. Then, the sound of a shotgun cocking from inside. Jason stiffened. A gruff voice called out, "Go away." Rowe didn't even flinch. "Dawson, it's me." Silence. Then, slow, heavy footsteps. The door unlocked with a loud clank, and it swung open just enough for Jason to see a man in his 50s, unshaven, wearing a worn-out hoodie. His sharp eyes flicked between them, and his grip on the shotgun didn't loosen. "What do you want?" he asked. Rowe crossed her arms. "We need your help." Dawson snorted. "I don't help cops." Rowe smirked. "Good thing I don't follow the rules, then." Dawson's eyes flicked to Jason. His expression changed slightly. Jason felt his stomach tighten. Dawson stared at him for a long moment. Then, he opened the door wider. "Come inside." Jason and his mom hesitated. Rowe stepped in first. Jason and his mom followed. The cabin was cluttered with old maps, newspaper clippings, and computer screens. A board on the wall was covered in red strings connecting names and photos. Jason's blood ran cold. One of the photos was Judge Sterling. Dawson shut the door behind them, locking it with heavy bolts. Then he turned to Jason. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, kid." Jason swallowed hard. "Then tell me." Dawson studied him. Then he pointed to the board. "Judge Sterling isn't just corrupt. He's part of something much worse." Jason's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Dawson exhaled, then said 2 words that made Jason's blood turn to ice. "The Order." Jason's mom stiffened. "What's that?" Dawson sat down and rubbed his face. "A secret organization. One that's been pulling strings for decades. Judges, politicians, police chiefs. They're everywhere." Jason's pulse pounded. Dawson locked eyes with him. "And for some reason, kid, they want you." Jason's breath hitched. His mom grabbed his arm. "No, that's insane. He's just a kid." Dawson didn't blink. "Not to them." Jason felt a cold chill run down his spine. What did the Order want with him? And how far would they go to get him? Jason didn't know. But one thing was clear. He wasn't running anymore. He was going to fight back. Jason sat frozen, staring at the web of red strings connecting names and faces on Dawson's board. Judge Sterling's face was pinned near the center, surrounded by photos of people Jason didn't recognize. Politicians, police officers, judges. His throat felt dry. The Order. The words lingered in the air like a ghost. His mother's grip tightened on his arm. "This is insane," she whispered. "A secret organization? That's the kind of stuff you see in movies." Dawson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Movies get a lot more right than you think." Jason swallowed hard. "What do they want with me?" Dawson studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "That's the part one don't know yet. But if the Order is after you, it means one of 2 things." Jason's heart pounded. "What?" Dawson raised a single finger. "1. They think you know something. Maybe you stumbled onto something important, something you weren't supposed to see." Jason frowned. "But I don't." He stopped. He had stumbled onto something. The USB drive. The security footage. Was that enough for an entire organization to come after him? Dawson lifted a second finger. Or two, you're important to them in some way. Maybe even more important than you realize. Jason felt a chill. Why would I be important to them? Dawson didn't answer right away. He glanced at Jason's mom. What about his father? Jason's mom tensed. He left before Jason was born. Dawson's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you sure? Jason's mom hesitated. Jason had never seen her hesitate about his dad before. Yes, she said firmly. He's not part of this. Dawson didn't look convinced. Jason felt like the room was closing in on him. His father was a stranger, someone he had never thought about much. But now, could his dad be connected to this? Jason shook his head. I don't care about my father. I just want to stop them. Dawson smirked. Good. Because we don't have time for family reunions. He stood and walked over to the board, pulling down a picture of Judge Sterling. Right now, we have one advantage. Sterling is on the run. That means the order is exposed. Jason sat up. So we can take them down? Dawson exhaled. No, not all of them. Not yet. But we can hurt them. Make them think twice about coming after you. Jason nodded. He was tired of running. His mom, however, didn't look convinced. This is dangerous, she said. We're talking about people who have connections in the government, the police. How do you fight against something that powerful? Dawson gave her a grim smile. You don't fight them head-on. You make them fear you. Jason shivered. He wasn't sure if that was possible, but he had to try. 2 hours later, Dawson led them to a basement filled with equipment, computers, maps, radios. Jason's eyes widened. This looks like a spy hideout, he whispered. Dawson chuckled. You watched too many movies, kid. He sat at the main computer and started typing. I've been keeping tabs on Sterling and his associates for years. The problem is, they're ghosts. They hide their tracks well. Jason frowned. But they found us easily. Dawson nodded. Exactly. Which means we can find them. Jason's mom crossed her arms. And how do we do that? Dawson smirked. We bait the trap. Jason's breath caught. You mean, make them come to us? Dawson nodded. They want you, Jason. So we give them a reason to think they have you. Jason exchanged a glance with his mom. This was insane. But it might be the only way. Dawson turned the monitor around. A map of the city appeared, flashing with different markers. There's an abandoned warehouse near the docks, Dawson said. Sterling used it for secret meetings when he was a judge. My guess? He still does. Jason's mom frowned. So what? We just walk in? Dawson smirked. No, but we make them think Jason did. Jason's pulse quickened. How? Dawson clicked a few keys. The screen changed to show a fake police report, one that claimed Jason had been captured and was being held at the warehouse. Jason's eyes widened. You're making them think the police got me? Dawson nodded. Exactly. If Sterling and his people think you've been caught, they'll panic. They'll try to get to you before you can talk. Jason swallowed hard. And that's when we catch them. Dawson grinned. Now you're getting it. His mom still looked uncertain. And what if they figure it out? Dawson's smirk faded. Then we run. Jason's hands clenched. He was done running. I want to do this, he said firmly. His mom exhaled sharply. Then, reluctantly, she nodded. Fine, she said. But if anything goes wrong, Dawson cut her off. We'll be ready. Jason hoped he was right. That night, Dawson sent out the fake police report. Now, all they had to do was wait. Jason lay on a mattress in the corner of Dawson's basement, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced. Would Sterling take the bait? Would they finally get answers? Then, Dawson's phone buzzed. Jason sat up fast. Dawson checked the screen and smiled. We got a hit. Jason's mom leaned forward. What does that mean? Dawson turned the screen toward them. A car had been spotted near the docks. The license plate matched one of Judge Sterling's associates. Jason's heart pounded. They had taken the bait. Dawson stood. Time to move. Jason got up, adrenaline rushing through his veins. They grabbed their jackets. Dawson handed Jason's mom a small pistol. She hesitated. Dawson gave her a serious look. I don't take risks. She took it. Jason followed them out the door. The plan was in motion, but Jason had a sinking feeling. Something was waiting for them at the docks. Something worse than Sterling, and he was about to find out what. The night air was thick with mist as Dawson's truck rumbled toward the docks. Jason sat in the back seat, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by dark warehouses and silent waters. His mom sat beside him, gripping the pistol Dawson had given her. Jason had never seen her hold a gun before. It made everything feel real. You ready for this, kid? Dawson asked from the driver's seat. Jason swallowed hard.
No.
Dawson chuckled. Good. That means you're smart. Jason tightened his fists. This was it. They had set the trap. Judge Sterling and his people had taken the bait. Now, all they had to do was catch them. But deep down, Jason had a bad feeling. Something wasn't right. The truck rolled to a stop a block away from the warehouse. Dawson turned off the engine. All right, he said, voice low. No sudden moves. We watch from a distance. If things get ugly, we leave. Jason's mom nodded, but Jason knew she wouldn't leave without a fight. They crept through the shadows, moving closer to the warehouse. Jason's shoes crunched softly against the gravel. He held his breath. Dawson led them behind a stack of rusted shipping containers. From there, they had a clear view of the warehouse entrance. Jason's stomach twisted. A black SUV was parked outside, and standing next to it was Judge Sterling. Jason's breath caught. Sterling looked different now. His usual calm, smug expression was gone. He looked furious, restless, his eyes scanning the area like he was expecting an ambush. He knew something was off. Jason turned to Dawson. He doesn't believe the trap. Dawson frowned. He's being cautious. But he's here. That means he's still looking for you. Jason's mom gritted her teeth. We should call the police. Dawson shook his head. No good. Whoever helped him escape is probably still pulling strings. If we want to take him down, we need proof. Real proof. Jason's mind raced. They needed something solid, something that no one could cover up. Then, the warehouse door opened. Two men stepped out, dressed in dark suits. The same kind of men who had chased Jason and his mom. Jason shuddered. They weren't alone. Dawson tensed. That's not good. Sterling turned to the men, his voice sharp. Where's the kid? One of the suited men hesitated. We haven't found him. Jason's stomach flipped. Sterling's face darkened. Then why did you drag me out here? The suited man swallowed. The police report said, it was a trap, you idiot. Sterling snapped. Jason's heart pounded. They knew. Sterling clenched his jaw, his hand twitching toward his coat pocket. Find them. Now. Jason stiffened. Dawson grabbed Jason's arm. We're leaving. Jason wanted to argue, but he saw the look in Dawson's eyes. This wasn't a fight they could win. Not yet. They turned to slip back into the shadows and stepped right into another man. Jason's breath hitched. The man's face twisted in surprise, then turned deadly. Hey! Dawson didn't hesitate. He punched the man in the throat. The man staggered, choking. Dawson grabbed Jason and his mom and shoved them forward. Run! Jason bolted. His legs moved before his brain could catch up. Behind him, shouting erupted. They're here. Gunshots rang out. Jason's mom yanked him behind a shipping container. A bullet pinged off the metal, inches from his head. His breath came in ragged gasps. Dawson spun around and fired his own gun. The sharp crack echoed through the docks. One of the suited men dropped with a shout, but more were coming. Jason peeked around the container and locked eyes with Judge Sterling. Sterling's face twisted with fury. Then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was cold, knowing, like he had been waiting for this moment. Jason's stomach twisted. Jason. His mom grabbed his arm. We have to. Then, a black van screeched around the corner. Jason barely had time to react before the doors burst open. More men. More suits. Jason's mom raised her gun. A dart hit her neck. Jason's world slowed. Mom! He screamed. Her eyes widened in shock. She staggered, her body going limp. Jason caught her before she collapsed. Dawson fired wildly. Move, kid. But Jason couldn't move. Sterling stepped forward, his eyes locked on Jason. Jason's breath hitched. The men in suits grabbed his mom, dragged her toward the van. Jason fought, struggled, kicked. Another dart hit his arm. His vision blurred. No, no, no. He tried to scream, but the world tilted. His body refused to move. His last thought before the darkness swallowed him was a whisper in his ear. Judge Sterling's voice. "Welcome to the order, Jason." Jason's body was heavy, his mind sluggish. He tried to open his eyes, but the world around him felt distant, blurred. His limbs wouldn't move. A dull humming noise filled his ears, an engine vibrating beneath him. Then, voices. He's waking up. Jason's heart pounded. Where am I? The last thing he remembered was his mother falling, the dart hitting his arm, and then, Judge Sterling. His voice. "Welcome to the order, Jason." Jason's eyes fluttered open. The ceiling above him was dark metal. The space around him rocked slightly. He was in a vehicle. A van. His stomach twisted. He tried to move, but his wrists and ankles were strapped down. Panic flared through him. Where was his mom? He turned his head. She was slumped against the opposite wall, still unconscious. A thick wave of relief and terror crashed over Jason. She was alive. But for how long? He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. Think, Jason. Think. Two men sat near the front, facing him. Suits. The same ones from the warehouse. And next to them, Judge Sterling. Jason's breath caught. Sterling was completely calm, watching him with sharp, amused eyes. "You know, Jason," he said smoothly, "for a child, you've caused me a great deal of trouble." Jason glared at him. "Where are you taking us?" Sterling chuckled. "Straight to the heart of the order." Jason's fingers twitched against the straps. "Why? What do you want from me?" Sterling's smile widened. "I want you to understand something. You've been fighting against something much larger than you realize. You think I was the enemy? You think I was the problem?" He shook his head. "I'm nothing more than a gatekeeper, Jason. And you, well, you were meant to be on the other side of that gate." Jason's blood ran cold. "You're lying." Sterling raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" Jason's stomach churned. Every part of him screamed that this was wrong. But there was something in Sterling's voice, something that made his skin crawl, like he knew something Jason didn't. Sterling leaned forward. "Tell me, Jason, has your mother ever told you the truth about your father?" Jason stiffened. The air inside the van felt heavier. Sterling's smile deepened. I see she hasn't." Jason forced himself to breathe. "I don't care about him." "You should," Sterling said, "because he is the reason the order wants you." Jason's heart pounded. Sterling exhaled dramatically. "You see, Jason, your father was one of us. A high-ranking member. A man of great importance." Jason shook his head. "No, you're lying." Sterling shrugged. "Believe what you want, but you belong to the order. It's in your blood." Jason's pulse raced. It couldn't be true. It wasn't true. But then, his mother. She had hesitated when Dawson asked about his father. Had she known? Jason's breath hitched. "If that's true, why are you hunting us?" Sterling's face darkened. "Because your mother took you away from us. She tried to erase your past, to hide you from your true purpose. And we cannot allow that." Jason clenched his teeth. "I'd rather die than join you." Sterling sighed. "Yes, well, you'll learn in time." Jason's mind spun. They were taking him somewhere, to the order. He had to stop them. He had to get his mother out. He forced himself to stay calm, his fingers twitching slightly. The straps. How tight are they? Slowly, without making a sound, he started working his wrists loose. Sterling kept talking. "The order is bigger than you can imagine, Jason. It controls the laws, the judges, the police, even the government. It has existed for centuries." Jason's skin crawled. This wasn't just corruption. This was something worse. Sterling leaned back. "But don't worry. Once you see the truth, you'll understand. You were always meant to be one of us." Jason felt the strap around his wrist give slightly. Almost there. Then, a sudden bang erupted from the front of the van. The vehicle jerked violently to the side. Jason's body slammed against the wall as the van skidded, tires screeching. What was that? One of the men in suits shouted. Gunfire erupted outside. Jason's heart leapt. Dawson. It had to be Dawson. The men scrambled for their weapons. Jason saw his chance. With one last twist, he yanked his wrist free. Without hesitating, he grabbed the strap around his ankle and ripped it loose. His mom was still unconscious. He needed to get to her. Sterling turned toward him, eyes widening. No! Jason didn't give him time to react. He lunged, grabbing one of the suited men's guns before he could aim. The van hit something, tipping on its side. Jason felt gravity shift. Everything spun. Then crash. The world went black. Jason woke up to the sound of sirens. His body ached. His head pounded. Smoke filled the air. The van had flipped. He groaned, trying to move. Then, strong hands grabbed him. I got you, kid. Jason's eyes snapped open. Dawson. The older man dragged him out of the wreckage. Come on. We don't have much time. Jason coughed. My mom. Dawson nodded. Already got her. She's safe. Jason exhaled sharply. Relief flooded him. Then he turned, searching. Where was Sterling? The van was wrecked, broken glass everywhere. The men in suits lay scattered, some unconscious, some gone. But Judge Sterling. Jason's heart pounded. He was missing. Dawson cursed under his breath. We need to move. Jason clenched his fists. He got away. Dawson nodded grimly. For now. Jason took a shaky breath. It wasn't over. The order was still out there. Judge Sterling was still alive. And Jason knew, deep in his bones, they would come back for him. But this time, he would be ready.